Good morning. I came from 33rd Street via the borderland. The near-death experience winding through many worlds. It's good to be here. Thank you, PMH, so much. I appreciate it so much. You know, I remember seeing a version of Hamlet starring Sir John Gielgud. How many of you remember Sir John Gielgud? Won the Academy Award in Arthur. You know, just classic Shakespearean actor, but a wonderful comedian. But the reason I bring up Hamlet is because there is in Act 3, it's a wonderful part where he says, "In that sleep of death, what dreams may come, after we've shed this mortal coil, must give us pause for thought. In that sleep of death, what dreams may come, must give us pause for thought." When I read that, and then when I saw him do that, a couple of weeks later, I'm watching this interview, this well-known author, and best-selling author, probably one of the best-selling authors of the 20th century, gangly, funny guy, and he said, "Who is your greatest influence in your writing?" And he said, "I would have to say Richard Matheson, who is the author of What Dreams May Come." How many of you have seen What Dreams May Come, the film? The Incredible Shrinking Man. The gangly-looking, nerdy-looking author who was being interviewed was none other than Mr. Stephen King. Stephen King. What Dreams May Come, what's different from that work, of any other of Richard Matheson's work, is he was traditionally a horror writer, horror fiction. The Legend of Hell House, Earthbound, but there was always a spiritual theme running through his work. And so when it was in 1980 or 1981, when I first got stationed here in the Navy, and I was speaking with Edgar Casey, Edgar Cayce's son, he said, "If you want the best picture or the best idea of what happens when we die," he said, "get What Dreams May Come." It is the most astonishing portrait of the afterlife, and what's unique about it is out of the 40 books that Richard Matheson wrote, and he gave me permission, bless his heart, to use portions of it in my book, Universe of Worlds. And as a novelist, novelists never write a preface or anything like that. And but in this one, he said, because What Dreams May Come, the subject is survival after death, it is essential that you realize before reading the story that only one aspect of it is fictional. The characters and their relationships. With few exceptions, every other detail is derived exclusively from research. He said, the books used for this research are many and diverse, yet despite their wide variation with regard to authors and times, there is a persistent, unavoidable uniformity to their content of the same theme of the dimensions of life after death. You would, of course, have to read them all to prove this to yourself, and I urge you to do so. You'll find it enlightening and an extraordinary experience. If you get the book for no other reason, get it for the bibliography at the end. All of my own experiences, my own research, and traveling with people that, as my father said, yeah, my youngest kid runs around with the dead people. Because I've had the privilege of sharing the platform with PMH Atwater and Dr. George Ritchie, whose extraordinary near-death experiences have literally changed our lives, because the greatest fear Americans have, well, actually, number 2, fear of death. The number 1 fear Americans have is fear of public speaking. People would rather die than do what I'm doing right now. Uh, but what is interesting is the prophecy that was fulfilled in so many people when George Ritchie came forward and was talking about his near-death experience in the 1960s on the campus of the University of Virginia, about his extraordinary experience when he died from pneumonia in 1942. And unlike a lot of near-death experiences, he was shown the different dimensions and realms that souls pass to. And just as we all have unique lives that no two people have the same experience, we can be born into the same family, the same household, but our perception of this life is uniquely our own. So in that light, our passage to the other side will also be uniquely our own experience. Yes, just like we all come into the earth the same way, the environment that we're born into, though, the parents we have, the place that we live, the friends that we make, that is our own unique experience. So in that, Mr. Casey said, the time will come, he said, when there will be no more death, when death shall be no more. He said, do not misunderstand nor misinterpret. The interpretation of death will be made plain. And that was in 1932, and I thought, the interpretation of death will be made plain. And I thought, PMH Atwater, Raymond Moody, Dr. George Ritchie, Richard Matheson, What Dreams May Come. Death used to be referred to as that mysterious place from which no traveler returns to tell the tale. How grim and dramatic. Well, come to find out, it's not shadowy at all. Well lit, plenty of guides, with much better directions than my trek here this morning. In What Dreams May Come, the main character, Chris Nielsen, is killed in an automobile accident. And as happens in a number of cases, it takes a while to realize that any change has taken place. I'm reminded of a man who had a near-death experience. He had a heart attack, and he's, walking to the office, and suddenly he hears all this activity and whatnot, and he looks behind him, and there's this man who's fallen to the sidewalk, and he goes, oh, gosh, he puts his briefcase down, and he's trying to help him, and people are getting in his way, but he seems to go right through them, and an ambulance comes. He goes, oh, thank goodness. And they load him up, take him to the hospital, and he starts to pick up his briefcase, and he can't. He's going, and there's his close friend that died 5 years earlier. He goes, that was something, wasn't it? He said, what's happening here? And he said, it was very kind of you to offer to help that man with his heart attack, but my friend, that was you. And he said, get out of here. He said, but I'm fine, I still have my suit on. He said, yes, you still do. Nothing's changed. And he said, except you can't pick up your briefcase. He said, you mean? He said, yes, come with me. And he goes, and it's like this window opens up, and they go through this doorway, and he reviews his life, communicates with friends, his family is there. But my point to the story is, death is so subtle, and it comes so easily that the memory of the actual event, we don't remember it. Because we're used to seeing ourselves in a two-dimensional mirror. When we look at ourselves in the mirror. From the after-death perspective, you're seeing yourself that, like so many people say, they didn't even recognize themselves. And it's because they're seeing themselves as others saw them. And so Mr. Casey said, it's much easier to leave this world than it is to enter into it. I mean, how many of you remember your birth? There's always one. But really, there's a reason for that. Think of if we had the conscious memory of our birth, what that would be like. Trauma, abject trauma. And so even when the death in this realm looks grisly or traumatic, the soul does not remember that any more than we remember our painful birth into this world. My mother was in labor with me for 36 hours. I was breech. I was dragged kicking and screaming back into this life, like many people are dragged kicking and screaming to the other side. And then after they cross over and they realize what's happened, they're like, you mean that was it? That's nothing. And I went to dinner with John Holland last night, and how many of you, in the messages that he gave, received a message? What I told John was, I said, thank you for the message from my nephew, Ryan. And he said, what? I said, my nephew was killed in Afghanistan last year. And my father is a teacher and an architect. And that side of the family's last name is Williams. And I'm sitting in the back, he was talking to a lady right over here. And what Ryan said to his mother before he went to Afghanistan is, he said, Mom, no matter what happens, don't worry about me. It's like the soul knows, for whatever reason, and this is the most difficult thing that any parent can go through is the death of their son or daughter. My mom used to say, it's just against nature. Parents are not supposed to bury their children. It's not supposed to go that way. And it's not. And so many people came to Mr. Casey to ask, why did this happen? And in those readings, which I drew excerpts from and put in Universal Worlds, he never found fault with the parents. What he said in the majority of the cases was the soul needed to be near the parents for just a short time. He said that the passing of that soul, he said, whether the soul enters in for days, weeks, months, or even a few hours, he said, that moment, he said, that the soul enters in one reading, he said, that soul experienced all the love that may be experienced over a lifetime and took that love and chose to return home to its maker. Isn't that beautiful? And he said, and the impression that it made upon the soul was as dramatic as a moment when people have the near-death experience. And yet, the parents are left with the greatest sadness of all. And what usually happens after a time is they begin the search. And they'll run into other parents, or they'll have a dream where they'll see their son, or they'll hear them. But when Mr. Casey said, this has come for the spiritual awakening of the parents, they eventually will find that someone, whether they go to a medium or whether they have dreams, that child is still the bond of love that they've shared with that soul can never be broken, and that there will always be a reunion. Because there's that golden thread that runs through all of us that, as Mr. Casey said, to a bereaved parent, he said, if they would set aside for a moment the condemnation of the circumstances, the sense of loss, and be silent, he said, then they may know that all is well in the borderland. And he called the borderland also the summer land, which is like it's a transitionary place where Jesus referred to it as paradise. It's Mr. Casey said in meditation and through dreams, we can access that, but we just have to be silent and open ourselves, not to draw them back here, but to be open that and believe that it's just a thin veil that separates this world from the next. And for many of us, it's like it's intellectually challenging because this goes far beyond the intellect. And so when Richard Matheson's character, Chris, gets hit by this car, he saw himself in the hospital room, and he refused to believe that he was dead. He said he felt better, more alive than he ever had. The memories of the car accident and of his wife crying had grown vague, actually non-existent. He spoke to them. Every time he thought of his wife, he was right in front of her, talking to her, but they ignored him. That's what Dr. George Ritchie said. After he died, he's trying to get the attention of somebody in the hospital. And finally, he stood in the middle of the hallway. This nurse was coming down. He said, I was not going to move until she acknowledged me. Walked right through him. And he's like, it took me some time to realize. And so many aspects of Chris's fictional experience were similar to the near-death experience of Dr. George Ritchie. And finally, his uncle came to him in the book. Chris, do you know what happened yet? Happened? Yes. You've died. That's absurd. If I were dead, I wouldn't have a brain. Chris, it doesn't work that way. You have a mind. The mind works through the brain. The mind is independent of the body. You're nuts, he said. And so Chris stayed in denial for a period of time, still believing that he was dreaming or under anesthesia during some surgical procedure. He trailed after his weeping wife, trying to get her to speak to him. And soul, because we have free will, if a soul stubbornly refuses to ignore all the directions that's given by the spirit guides that are there to help them, that it's time to move on, then the soul is left to sort of walk through this foggy, misty area, kind of a spiritual limbo. There, the material world looks like it's shrouded in a mist or a fog, and yet there's always the guides that return over and over to say, hey, want to come with me? You know, you don't have to stay here. There's light right over here. You know, it's like, and soul's like, no. And so when Richard Matheson wrote this character, he described it as Chris kept sending his guide away and then sank deeper into the shadowland. This after-death place is literally a valley of indecision, neither here nor there. Chris existed in a dark, murky, cold, foggy realm. He felt as if his body were made of stone. His movements became sluggish. And finally, he said, he remembered the guide saying, Chris, if you just think of a bright world, a bright place, if you just think, just envision it, you'll go there. And then Chris remembered, if he concentrated on a brighter world, he'd be taken out of here. Finally, at long last, he went, oh, all right. Somebody please help me, take me out of here. If I can't comfort my wife, take me away. Suddenly, it's like he walks into this beautiful, sunlit place. In an instant, he's there. And his spirit guide, his uncle, said, well, it's about time. He said, you mean, was that you at the hospital? He says, yes, Chris. He said, what was all that wandering? He said, that, my friend, was your own stubbornness. Your refusal to move on. He said, horrible, you know. And he said, Chris, just as you had free will in the earth, you know, I couldn't help you because you didn't ask for help. Sound familiar? Ever tried to help someone that didn't want your help? Fun, isn't it? It's the same way. And so, but yes, regardless of the circumstances, there eventually comes the place where the soul becomes so weary of holding on to the old that it goes, all right, I'll go. And the first thing he saw once, he said, if I can't help her, take me away. He's in this beautiful place. And guess who comes running to meet him? His dog, Katie. His beloved dog. Just full of life, vibrant. And they do come to meet us. You know, just as everything in the earth is infused with spirit. Everything. I mean, this podium, it was a thought before it was a thing. So even it, you know, knows to hold itself together so I can put my book on it, or else it would just dissolve. And yet, if we looked at this podium from a fourth dimensional viewpoint, it wouldn't be solid at all. Basic physics would tell you that this thing is in motion, that the molecules, that it would look like a hologram. And in what dreams may come, Chris said, how come no matter what I did, Anne couldn't hear me? And how come I was walking through things? He said, Chris, you're operating now at a higher frequency, a higher rate of vibration. And it's like he passed his arm like this, and he saw the earth like a hologram. And he said, you see, the atoms and molecules are spaced so far apart in the three-dimensional world that you can walk through it just as mortals walk through a fog. Does it make sense? It's like, and when I thought of that, I thought, that's, like the fourth dimension could best be described as an idea or a thought or an emotion. It's like you can't see it, you can feel it, and you can see it in your mind's eye, but it of itself, it has no three-dimensional reality. And so he talks about the astral realm of the Summerland or the Borderland, and he said, excuse me just a moment, that the atmosphere of the Summerland is so pliable. So the atmosphere of the Summerland is malleable. It literally reproduces the image of any sustained thought. It's like a mold waiting for imprints. Except for our bodies, no form is stable unless concentrated thought makes it so. On Earth, before anything is created materially, it has to be created mentally. When matter is put aside, all creation becomes exclusively mental, or the fourth dimensional power of the mind. What's interesting is he says, except for our bodies, no form is stable unless concentrated thought makes it so. So because in this realm, what you think of is immediately there, because it's, we might call it what Annie Besant and C.W. Ledbetter of the Theosophical Society called the causal plane, or the causal realm, the realm of cause. In that realm of cause, this is where our mind, what we've drawn to create everything in our lives. So what we've loved, what our heart has treasured, when we pass over, that is what immediately what is before us. And so, for some souls, when they pass over, there was one man who said, I passed through a realm where there were groups of people playing cards. They've been playing cards for 500 years. Why? Because that's what they loved. There's some that are reading. In Helen Greaves' book, Testimony of Light, in What Dreams May Come, in the Edgar Cayce readings, and Dr. George Ritchie's near-death experience, all of them talked about this massive, beautiful library. George described it like, he said, it's like a university the size of Los Angeles. Books, he said, where souls from all over the universe come to learn about God and the Spirit. And I remember in the book, Chris goes to this library, and there's teachers, and there's masters, and there's different places or rooms where people are taking courses just like we are here. Yet he saw this one area that had like this sort of a velvet rope, and you could go over there to the books, but he saw some people going over there, and the librarian would go. And he said, what's that? And the librarian said, oh, those are books that haven't been written on earth yet. We have to be very careful with those. And he went, books, you mean? Yes, they're awaiting manifestation. So everything here we're drawing from, whether artistically, musically, in writing, building, architecture, it all is coming from the causal realm. So not only is nothing lost when we pass on, but we get to go to the source of the place of whatever it is that we've loved. He said, Chris asked about the beautiful landscapes and the buildings that he saw, and the libraries. And he went to a concert and listened to the most magnificent opera that was composed by Beethoven after he passed. And as it was playing, he didn't see any people, but the music created these holographic, beautiful images that the music itself created these magnificent forms. And Mr. Casey said, music is the bridge between the seen and the unseen world. Because all of you have listened to a piece of music that absolutely sends you, right? That feeling you get, like you get chills when you hear it, that's the soul. That's the resonance. That's why music can carry you to, it has an awakening power of the spirit. That's why it's so conducive to meditation, because the vibrations of the music opens the higher senses to clairaudience, to where you're in meditation, and as you listen, you can see things, you can envision things. And so when he asked about the landscapes, his guide, Albert, explained that they're designed by people who either enjoyed architecture or that kind of work on earth, or who desired to do such work in the afterlife. Through cooperative effort, a group of souls created buildings or artworks, and he said, they correct the model as needed, and then instruct those who were builders on earth, and together, all of their minds are in unified concentration. They cause the matrix to produce a full-scale impression of the structure. So they're building a bridge or a large building. What I loved was they said they caused the matrix to produce a full-scale impression of the structure. They stop before it's completed, correct to perfection, then proceed until solidification takes place. What he called the matrix, ever-present creative spirit that exists in all that we do, gardening, whatever it is. Well, and so are there universities on the other side? Yes. Everything, again, this is just the three-dimensional projection of spiritual form. And so if you love books here, you're going to love them over there. And I remember when John was talking yesterday, he was talking to someone about, he loved fishing, didn't he? And she said, yes. He said, well, he's fishing now. And I say this because Edgar Casey said, before he passed consciously, he said, well, if I can't fish, I'm not going. And so it's not ludicrous at all. What you've loved here, you will love there, because that's the source of all things. And so souls journey through the worlds to become co-creators with God. It's like the destination is a given. We're all on the road back to conscious awareness that we are co-creators. And so we come into the earth, and for a moment, it's like a veil drops of temporary amnesia. So we don't remember the specifics of the lives that we've lived before. And that's for good reason. Because if we remembered every detail of the things and the people we knew and the things we did in previous lives, can you imagine? Hey, you ran over me in Rome. You stole my husband. You took my wife. Hey! I mean, there's good reason we don't remember the details. And yet, we do remember through what we love, what we desire. Hugh Casey was the one that told me what our desires are our memories of past lives. Like if you're drawn to a certain period in history. PMH, what's your favorite period in history? What century, what time?
Eocene period.
Eocene, which was?
The time of the deciduous trees.
The time of the deciduous trees.
When they first developed.
When they first what?
When they first developed in the earth.
When they Wow, I asked the wrong person. That's incredible. No. That's magnificent.
Well, that's when I first landed here from another planet.
Yeah, all of us did. Yeah, and that's what she just said was that was when I landed here from another planet. And what's so beautiful about that is people talk about extraterrestrial life. We are extraterrestrial life. We are made of the elements of the stars. We came from out there. And so when people talk about, do you believe in alien life forms? I said, well, you're talking to one. I always felt like that. My mother would agree. She said, you were, difficult, yes. She said, you were born an adult. When I was little, when people would come and visit, I would give them a tour. Like we had a house in the woods, little house, but I had to show them everything. Like at 4 years old, I'm going, over here is in this. And I don't know how many of you know this or not, but until age 15, I had a severe stuttering problem. I couldn't speak. Could not speak. I mean, the teacher would call on me in class to speak. If it started with the word T, I mean, it was so bad that I was silent until about age 16. You haven't been able to shut me up since. But what I used to do, though, was I used to listen to music, and I would envision myself right where I am right now, talking and about something, but just speaking. Or I envisioned myself on stage. So I withdrew from the world when I was little because kids, they can be very cruel, especially when you stutter. And so my world was writing and watching movies, and when I would listen to music, I would just envision myself speaking clearly. And when I went through puberty, it started to go away. And then by age 16, it's like I was about this tall, about 120 pounds, with this voice. I could clear the hallways, and they're like looking for some kid that, excuse me, and it's like, and here's this. So, and I remember my thought was, God, if you just let me speak, I promise I'll do something with it. And what I didn't know was those years that I was envisioning, daydreaming, I was building the future in this life. As Richard Matheson said, what you hold as a sustained thought eventually comes into manifestation. I had really completely forgotten about the times when I was envisioning myself talking to people until I was in the Navy, and I was a broadcast journalist, and this was in Haifa, Israel, and I was shooting the USO opening, and at the conclusion I said, and so the USO in Haifa, Israel is home, away from home, to soldiers and sailors around the world. For the U.S. Navy News Network, I'm Robert Grant. And automatically I went back in time and saw this little kid writing about being able to speak. And it was like just a moment, right when I said, reporting live from Haifa, Israel, I'm Robert Grant. And it was like, so what you hold in mind, what you envision, you will eventually come into manifestation. In the afterlife, it's much faster. So the only difference between here and there is the rate of vibration and the speed in which things happen. And so there are realms of literature, science, music, art, medicine, and the other healing arts. Because if you're a doctor in this world, when you pass over, you're still a doctor. And so I have no doubt that when Edgar Cayce would give a reading for someone, a medical reading, having no knowledge, no medical knowledge here, he was drawing from others on the other side who were doctors. Because those medical readings, I mean, having spent 5 years computerizing them, he spoke in the language of a Harvard physician, sometimes giving the white and red blood cell count of the patient. Yeah, absolutely amazing. And so when people talk about the source of Edgar Cayce's readings, yes, there is one source, but there's many sources, meaning there's, for medical readings, I have no doubt he was drawing from the wisdom of all known and unknown branches of science and medicine. I mean, there were things that, like, he would recommend a prescription for someone and then detail the prescription. 4 drops of, or minims, as he called them, tincture of benzoin, spirits of camphor. He prescribed, contrary to what you may have heard, he did use allopathic medicine. He did prescribe drugs. When his wife Gertrude was dying from tuberculosis, you know, at this point he was very leery of this gift, because when he went to sleep to give a reading, he went to sleep. And so he was afraid someone would get hurt. And so here is the love of his life, and they've sent her home to die. And she said something like, "It can't hurt now." And so he gave a series of readings for his wife. And among the many things that he prescribed, one of them was heroin, small doses. The main thing was breathing the fumes of apple brandy from a charred oak keg. He said this will kill the tuberculosis bug and heal the damaged lung tissue. And at this point, Gertrude's lungs were hemorrhaging. And within 8 months, she was completely well. And she lived to be 65. And she died of causes unrelated to tuberculosis. And so that was like the beginning for Edgar Casey, that if the readings help my wife, how can I turn anybody else away who comes for my help? And so for 40 years, 40 plus years, Edgar Cayce would lie down and go to the unseen realms where all things are known. And, he spoke of Troy as being real at a time when that was considered fictitious. He spoke of Atlantis. He spoke of Lemuria. He spoke of the time when souls were mingling with the elements of the earth. He spoke of Greek mythology as history, that all of the creatures that we know in Greek mythology, these were souls that had mingled with the things of the earth and had created what he called monstrosities. So, was there a Medusa? Certainly. Could she turn you to stone? Absolutely. Why? The power of the mind and the belief. And so, souls had created quite an interesting portrait of things, not the divine design that we have now that we incarnate into. And that's why the opening sentence in Genesis says, "And chaos existed on the face of the deep." And God said, "Let there be light." In other words, it's like, okay, let's clean this up. And so that was like, whatever the soul journeyed through, it became a part of. And so there had to be a group to come in to create a pattern of perfect expression. And so we have this body that literally has centers where you can access and be in contact with the other side. This is why we sleep, why we dream. And almost all of us, how many of you have had a dream of someone you've known and loved, and it was vibrant? How many again? Yeah. And how many of them appeared younger? Yeah. There was someone who asked in a reading, why did I see my husband as a young man when he was old in years when he passed on? And he said, death is a birth. And birth into this realm may be called a death. And there was someone who had a near-death experience that says, I got great news for you folks. This is as dead as you'll ever be. That meaning this is the finite consciousness in this body, in this box, and yet we have the potential to become infinitely aware. That's why we've come. That's why we're back. That's why now things that a few hundred years ago we burned people at the stake for, now's on primetime television. Ghost Whisperer, Medium, Edgar Cayce in the ARE, even in the 1930s. Mr. Casey did not have an easy time with it. I mean, the word psychic was akin to witchcraft, sorcery. And so look how far we've come. And now, this is why I use What Dreams May Come in the movie The Sixth Sense as two contemporary models of what can happen when the soul passes over. In The Sixth Sense, the main character, he remains because... How many of you have seen The Sixth Sense? Okay. I don't want to ruin it for anybody who has not seen it, but there was unfinished business in his heart that he wanted to do. Meaning he needed to help someone before he could move on. And this was his own unique idea. This wasn't required by anybody else except himself. And once that task was completed, then he realized he was dead. Then he was like, oh. So some souls may stay around because they're helping someone that you may not even know. And it's not that they're stuck or earthbound, but that's the beauty of it. There's always someone there. As Edgar Cayce said, no soul enters that unseen realm alone. As Jesus put it, in my Father's house are many mansions, many states of consciousness. Like in this vicinity, you drive down the street and there's individual houses. Within those houses are universes. Each person is a universe unto themselves. And so the wonderful part is when we pass over, we are drawn to that which was familiar to us here in this life, meaning we gather to souls of like mind. In What Dreams May Come, Chris was aware of certain people and where they lived, but he wasn't close with them on the earth, so he wasn't close with them on the other side. So the difference between the physical world and when we pass over is we're drawn to others of like mind. So I guess what I'm saying is, if there's someone in your family that you have difficulty with, not to worry. But to send them light, though, and send them love, because a lot of times when the soul passes over there, for every soul, they pass through the life review period. And more than just a review, the soul feels and sees how they affected you through your eyes. Meaning, if there was someone in your family or there was someone that was cruel to you or hurt you or whatnot, and they've passed on, they will face, everyone faces themselves through the eyes of those that they've loved and those that they've hurt. How else could we learn? And so, for some souls, this is a difficult process because they didn't know. They didn't understand the pain they caused. And so, if you ever wondered someone who's passed on that was cruel to you, they need your prayers and they need your thoughts, because like so many teachers have said, if people knew what they were doing when they caused destruction or pain or suffering, if they knew that what they were doing was hurting themselves, they wouldn't do it. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. He wasn't saying that as a martyr. He was saying, truly, if these people knew who I was, they wouldn't be doing this. And yet, even with the crucifixion, he looked at his persecutors like a group of unruly school children who just didn't know any better. And because of that, it's like Gandhi forgave his assassin before he hit the ground. That love is what brought into manifestation the resurrection. It's like that what God has ordained in love, nothing can stop or halt or silence. And that's why Jesus said, I'm the first of many. I'm like the prototype of the perfect pattern, meaning that there was set a pattern of perfection that all of us will attain. And as complicated as we like to make things, it's through loving the unlovable, forgiving the unforgivable, and letting go of the hurt, of the pain. And this is a process. It's so easy for me to stand here and say, forgive those who hurt you. And as I'm speaking, I'm very well aware I'm speaking to myself. Forgiveness in a lot of cases is a process that sometimes begins with the prayer that Catherine Marshall said. Lord, I'm willing to be made willing. And you begin from there. And because sometimes you have to get angry first to get to forgiveness. And that's okay. That's okay. The natural response, is anger when someone hurts you. And Edgar Cayce said, be angry, but sin not. Meaning, get angry, be able to set boundaries, but do no harm in that. And so, because we're all human and we're emotional beings, as a byproduct of coming into this world, our emotions, we have an emotional body. And meaning we're super sensitive beings. And because of that, we will feel things deeply. The heights to the depths. It's like we've come to experience all things. And what I saw in What Dreams May Come and in the Casey readings, that it's not like the spiritual evolution towards perfection. It's not a journey like this, where it's this gradual incline. It's like a roller coaster, like this, where we come into this experience. We've all lived as kings and princes and queens, and we've lived as ladies of the evening or gentlemen of the evening. We've done it all through time and space. But now, having passed through all these experiences, we've now come for balance and cooperation to work together. And that's a unique thing. There is this networking that's happening now that is really unprecedented. Like, you go on the internet and you see all these different people, teachers, philosophies. It's like that there is a spiritual awakening or a revolution going on right now. And it's been building for some time. But now we're seeing children enter into the earth. PMH Atwater wrote about the indigo children. The new kids, yeah. Just new kids, yeah. And my nephew, Ryan, is one of them. Even though he died on the battlefield in Afghanistan, I can hear him right now going, that's a non-issue. I came in for an experience that I can't even explain to you. But he was one of those kids that was born an adult. And I miss him, and yet I know he's right here. That I can feel his presence. And so I think one of the most difficult parts in What Dreams May Come is the point in which Chris's wife commits suicide. And what was is so beautiful about the story is that because this was his soulmate, this was his twin soul, he journeyed to the place where she was to go and get her. Now, again, this is an individual experience too. In her case, he wrote, to kill oneself is to violate the law because it deprives that self from working out the needs of that life. And they think of suicide as a quick route to oblivion, an escape. Far from it. It merely alters a person from one form to another. Nothing can destroy the conditions from which the escape was sought. So there's a continuation under circumstances that are more painful than the ones the soul left for a period of time. When she killed herself, she merely discarded the denser part of her body. What remains is held magnetically to Earth, or by Earth, but where on Earth she was could be impossible to discover. The corridor between the physical and the astral worlds is, to all intents and purposes, endless. And yet, in that endless corridor, in the book, Chris goes to her funeral. And in the book, her children are still living. And Albert, his spirit guide, touches the youngest son who was praying for his mother. And he looks at Chris and says, I think I found her. I think I found her. And so they journey through the lower dimensions to where Anne was. She didn't believe that anything came after this life. Now, again, I'm speaking about an individual experience. I'm not talking about in generalities. I'm just using this as one example. Anthony Borgia, in 1914, wrote very similar. As Chris descended through the lower realms, like as there is a summer land, there's a place that might be called the winter land. And he said, but for the fact, it might be called the winter land, but for the fact that unlike the earthly winter that possesses a grandeur all its own, while there is nothing but abomination in the lower realms of the spirit world, the spiritual reaping that succeeds the earthly sowing. To escape moral justice upon the earth plane is to find strict and unrelenting justice in the spirit world, meaning that which we've planted, we must harvest, whatever that is. And that's an individual experience. We witnessed all manner of bestialities and grossness and barbarities and cruelties as the mind can scarcely contemplate. Every soul who lives in those awful places once lived upon the earth, and the whole of these regions exist by virtue of the same laws that govern beauty and happiness. So as a soul contemplates beauty and happiness, for souls that contemplate revenge, and to contemplate and to purposefully or maliciously harm someone, that sets up a pattern in the spiritual dimensions to which they must meet that. And even there, though, there are those guides that go to help bring light to those souls. But they exist, as he said, only by virtue of the acts or the intentions of the souls who carried out purposeful evil on the earth. The beauty of the spirit world is the outward and visible expression of the spiritual progression of its inhabitants. I'll say that again. The beauty of the spirit world is the outward and visible expression of the spiritual progression of its inhabitants. So if you love flowers and gardening, music, all those things, when we have earned the right to possess the things of beauty, they are given to us through the power of creation. That's why we have free will. We have the free will to create anything we want in the earth. And by that power, in this sense, it can be said that we have created everything through our minds. And it's interesting to me that when something beautiful and magnificent happens, the only time that I've heard someone say, why would God allow something like that to happen? It's always after some tragedy. It's never after something wonderful. It's like, when there's some devastation. In the ancient times, like if there was a landslide, say, that destroyed a village, a natural disaster, those who survived would have a celebration for 3 days because they knew that they, as a group, got to go home. They knew that what appeared to be a disaster or in this realm, that as a group they got they got to go home. So just imagine like you're at work on 9/11, for example, and suddenly you become aware, someone comes in and goes, guess what? You get to retire with full benefits. Come with me. We have a beautiful sunlit plane over here. Would you like a drink? Come on. Come with me. No memory. Even to those souls that we saw on CNN that we watched them jump to their death. What we did not see was they didn't jump to their death. When they stepped off that building, they stepped onto firm and spiritual ground. They were not aware of the descent of their body. They were only aware of they had firm footing and a well-lighted path into the next world. And the devastation that we saw was not even a memory. And I have an account in Universe of Worlds in this book of a woman who saw the bombing at the Pentagon, and she was not drawn to this material. And right before the plane hit the building, it was like, whenever if you've ever been in an automobile accident, how time slows down. She said she heard this sound that was like the end of the world. I mean, it was so loud, and she saw the plane. And that day she was running late for work. And she worked at the Pentagon. And she watched as the plane, before it hit the building, she said there were like these orbs of light that were zooming out of the plane and out of the building. And she said it was like they didn't leave it what appeared to be a moment before, but it was more like days before. And she said, and she heard, not like I'm talking now, but she said it was like this voice, but not a voice, it was a knowing. It's like what I was seeing what she heard was, these are souls and all is well. But she saw them as these orbs of light that were departing before the collision actually happened. And again, the soul knows. And so, whatever the circumstances are that lead to the end of this life, as this one young boy, he spoke through a medium, said to his father, he said, Dad, if it looks tragic from your end, it's only from your end. I got to graduate early. I only came in for 18 years. He said, and I came so that you might receive this message. And this man, Jasper Swain, wrote a book called On the Death of My Son. And it's now out of print, but they allowed me to use portions of it in Universe of Worlds because his son described in beautiful detail where he was, what he was doing, that he was one of the new kids, and that he lived his life for the purposes that his father would eventually write a book about his son communicating through him. He didn't say this, but that Jasper Swain eventually wrote a book and illustrates in detail that this was his son, and this man was an attorney and had absolutely no interest, Jasper Swain, no interest in life after death. And he was guided by the magic, synchronistic things to this woman who was a medium. And when she went into a trance, he said, I saw my son's face right in front of her. And he called his father by a nickname that only he knew. And so for several weeks, he would go over and allow his son to communicate. She allowed the son to come through with these beautiful messages and a description of how they're working with us, that they're working through the minds of writers, artists, architects, screenwriters. And so when The Sixth Sense came out, I had just written my book, The Place We Call Home, Exploring the Soul's Existence After Death. And my editor calls me and goes, Rob, have you seen The Sixth Sense? I said, no, why? She goes, remember the chapter you wrote about people who don't know they're dead? I said, yeah. Except when I wrote it, it's like I didn't have a frame of reference of exactly what are they doing, these people that don't know that they're dead. And it's like The Sixth Sense illustrates they're doing exactly what they did in life. You know, as this man helped other people in The Sixth Sense, he was helping others, and then he came to the awakening. And so the beautiful part is, even Anne, who had committed suicide in What Dreams May Come, this was not a suicide that was, again, I don't want to speak in generalities because it's so tempting to want one answer for things, and there isn't. It's an individual experience. So we can't ask the question, what happens in suicide? Well, again, it depends upon the circumstances. A suicide in which the cause is someone wants to just get out of all the trouble that they've caused, that's what Richard Matheson meant when he said, they're not leaving the circumstances behind. They're going to the source of the origin of their problems. That's far different from someone who's suffering from schizophrenia, where everything that they see or hear is a living nightmare. That the world has become so surreal, and it can be due to something that happened to them physically or mentally, but they want the nightmare to stop. That's like a little child who's fallen and gotten hurt. And you may be assured that there are guides that will pick that child up and carry them to a safe place. And so it's very, very different, and it's in unique circumstances. And because of Chris's love for his wife, where he found her was in a place that looked just like the home that they'd shared, but nothing was working. The water wasn't on, the electricity was out. It was always slightly cold. Anne was by herself. She didn't recognize Chris. Took her, and in the book, it's like, oh, it's forever. I mean, it's only like 4 pages, but you're reading, and because his guide says, now when you reach her, she won't recognize you. She doesn't know. She doesn't remember that she's dead. You need to keep that in mind, because she didn't believe anything came after. She'll be probably in a confused state and not yet able to face the fact of the memory that she had ended her own life. And so when he finds her, she's in the backyard, and their dog that had passed on was with her as a comfort to her. And she just was a bit vacant and confused because, again, as he said, she just cast off the denser part of her body. And yet, after a time, and the spirit guide, Albert, told Chris, said, Chris, and remember, as you go to her, you must keep in mind the love and hold in mind only that, or else what can happen is you too will be magnetically held in her mindset in that place, and you'll forget all about the summer land. You'll forget all about everything. So no matter what happens, you just keep light and love in your mind. And after a time, every time he gets close to breaking through like this veneer of her mind that doesn't remember that has blocked that she's killed herself. It's like her eyes would just become, like she couldn't hear him anymore. After a certain period of time, he loved her so much, he made the decision. He says, all right, Anne, we'll make this hell our heaven. And when he said that, she went, Chris, is it really you? He says, yes. And she goes, no, wait. You won't be able to leave now. And the next thing he remembers is he wakes up in what they call the halls of rest. There's all these people on these very comfortable couches, and there's like an attendant there. And these are souls who've like staunchly disbelieved in the afterlife or been afraid of it. And so until they're ready, it's like if they're starting to wake up and they're a little bit agitated, the guide touches them and they go back to sleep. And Chris wakes up and went, and there's Albert. He says, Albert? He says, yeah, Chris. He said, is everything okay? He goes, everything's great. He goes, and Anne? He said, I don't know how you did it, but she's freed. He said, can I see her? He said, well, she's in India. He goes, what? He said, yes, there was an opportunity for her to incarnate into India, and because of your love for her, it's like she would have remained in that place for the length of time that she would have lived on earth, and then she would have rejoined you. But because of what you did, an opportunity opened up for her to incarnate to India. And so the karmic repercussions of her taking an overdose of sleeping pills, she'll have a minor sleeping problem of insomnia. But other than that, she'll have a wonderful life. And he goes, when can I go? And he said, I knew you'd say that. He said, Chris said, is there any openings? And the guide says, as a matter of fact, there is. And so I'm giving this away because it's a beautiful story. If you've seen the film or you read the book, the end of it, there's two kids who are on a beach or in a boat, and they look at each other, and they remember who they are. And as they were soulmates in the life previous, they were rejoined in India again. And this is why the book is so much better than the film, because it details so much more. And yet, so even in cases where the death is the result of suicide, it's like the psalmist said, yea, though I take on the wings of morning and fly to the utmost parts of the universe, thou art there. Yea, though I may descend into the depths of the sea, behold, thou art there. Yea, though I may make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. In other words, there's no place we can go where God, where light is not. There will always be redemption, or there will always be those souls, those people to help us. Thank you.